Welcome to this new episode of the Tin Dog Podcast. Recorded live in front of a cat, usually. Not today, however, as I'm in a small office somewhere at work. We're covering the Fifth Doctor's time in the TARDIS. Now, I had intended to incorporate the Fifth Doctor, as played by Peter Davidson's TV stories, in with his Big Finish stories, trying to see where they fit, trying to see all that sort of thing, so that we get one continuous story of the Fifth Doctor. This does become problematic because obviously this will instantly age as soon as the next story comes along from Big Finish, and of course messes up the continuity. So what I've elected to do instead is I'll do a 5th Doctor, 6th Doctor and 7th Doctor story on their TV stories. The 8th Doctor will be the 8th Doctor and his subsequent Big Finish stories, and then at some point in the future I will do complete Big Finish reviews. That will be 5th Doctor, 6th Doctor, 7th Doctor, 8th Doctor stories, all reviewed either in production order or more likely the order that they're meant to be in when you listen to them. Does that make sense? So basically what I'm saying is this week I'll be talking mostly about Peter Davidson's time in control of the TARDIS. Now, in 1982, in January, which is when Peter Davidson started, I was 9. Ah, bless. And my doctor, the only doctor I'd ever known, had taken a fall from a radio telescope, and then he'd gone all blurry, turned into somebody called the Watcher, who when I was 9 I didn't really understand. And to be honest, looking back at the story now, I'm still not completely sure who the Watcher was. And then from that he turned into the bloke off the vet programme that we watched on a Sunday, or, as he was known, Peter Davidson. Now, Peter Davidson, of course, from this point onwards, becomes a lot of people's doctors. He is less visually frightening, as I've been told by some of my younger friends, than Tom Baker was. A lot of people were frightened of Dr. Eyes, as he was known to some people. Peter Davidson was a lot more acceptable, and of course was younger to some people. Hence the whole crossover. But to some people of my generation, there was a whole, we've got a new actor playing him. I've never seen that happen before. BBC Two had shown the 5 Faces of the Doctor season at some point around now to try and make you feel better about there being a new Doctor, and it did help. It did allow me, as a child, to experience other Doctors for the first time. So, we start with Castrovalva, named after an M.C. Escher painting. M.C. Escher is not a rap artist. Yo, I am M.C. Escher. That was a terrible voice. I apologise for anyone who hates me doing voices. Basically, it's another regeneration story, and again, they're never as wonderful as you would like. However, this one is one of the best. We've got a full TARDIS crew now, consisting of Tegan, the Australian air hostess, and of course my first major TV crush, Nyssa, who at the time felt fairly inconsequential, but looking back on it, she was a very good companion. Adric, yes, Adric, not as bad as everyone seems to make out, and at the time I know I liked him, and that I find weird. So we've got a full TARDIS, quite a large cast. Does allow the narrative to be split into 2 and have people talking to each other. So the story of Castrovalva is newly regenerated Doctor tries to heal himself and become more whole. His companions try to help out, but are tricked by the Master, first into returning to Event 1, which is the beginning of creation in the TARDIS, which would destroy the TARDIS and the Doctor. The Master at this point, of course, is played by Anthony Ainley, the character of which, of course, was Nyssa's father. She was never particularly fond of that storyline. Anyway, after that escape, they arrive on a place called Castrovalva. The Master's plans at this point are again convoluted, kind of pointless, and a bit, well, they're just complicated really. Castrovalva is a made-up place which appears in the non-existent computer paperbacks from the top. Look, just watch it. It's good. It's well done. And again, it's got the bloke out of Grange Hill, who was in Arvida's Impet, who was also in Pyramids of Mars. That's a good story, followed oddly by Fort of Doomsday. Now, until I saw it on VHS several years later, I was kind of unfamiliar with the story as a whole. Fort of Doomsday just didn't really fit. It's a studio-bound story, and I think the only thing that I remembered was the Doctor leaves the TARDIS without a spacesuit and with only a helmet. Now, as a child, I knew that that was wrong, and the Doctor should be wearing a spacesuit. It really, really annoyed me, because up to that point, I kind of had faith in Doctor Who as a source of science. I was 10. What are we saying? So, Fort of Doomsday is a spaceship which has not passed the speed of light. The Doctor's got a very odd relationship with the speed of light. Half the time he's saying that you can't go faster, the other half they're saying, of course you can, you just need the right equipment. It's a very odd thing, but either way, this spaceship, which has very complicated androids on board who don't have self-control, then they do have self-control, are travelling backwards and forwards from Earth to this planet of the frog people where they're evolving. It's odd, it's a little bit complicated, it's kind of dry. It does have some interpretive dance in it, if that's the sort of thing you like, but I kind of would rather just spin on until we get to Kinder. Kinder's a very nice story. It's part of a two-part story. It's two-part in the sense that in the new series we've got the long game followed by other stories set on Satellite 5. In this story we've got the Kinder, who are a race of sort of, well, they're seen as the noble savage type story, but obviously in Doctor Who the noble savage always knows more than the technological people. It's noteworthy for several reasons. One, it deals with a lot of mystical notions, but mainly it deals with European and especially English colonisation and the way that people can go native, and also it's kind of Heart of Darkness of Doctor Who. It's a nice story. The men of the tribe can't speak unless they're insane or exceptionally clever and have psychic powers. This is Tegan's story. She is possessed by a snake spirit called a Mara. Later on, we'll return to the Mara in the next season in Snake Dance, which was Martin Clune's first story, but I am getting ahead of myself. Definitely worth a look, that one. After Kinder, we have one of my own personal favourites, which is Visitation. Visitation is one of the pseudo-historical stories from Doctor Who. It's got the standard crew of 4 arriving on Earth, and it's 1666, I believe, and that's usually a bit of a giveaway to any historians about how this story ends. The Black Death is ravaging England, and you're kind of, oh, there you go. Some lights in the sky appear, and Fred Elliott from Coronation Street looks up and sees them. He's killed in the first 3 minutes of the story, which is very nice. And it's Manor House, it's a nice period piece. There's some very, very good performances in this story. I would recommend this one, apart from the ending. I don't want to spoil it, but anyone who knows their history even remotely knows exactly what happened in London in 1666. Visitation, pseudo-historical, is followed by possibly the last ever Doctor Who historical, which is Black Orchid. Black Orchid's set in that kind of 1920s, 30s time of the Charleston and the like, and Adric manages to eat quite a large amount of sandwiches in this story. Sadly, that's possibly the highlight. It's got an Agatha Christie feel to it. There's a murder takes place. The Doctor changes costumes, which is always good at this point because everyone seems to have a sort of superhero thing going on where they never get changed for 3 years. And we don't like to question that. What else can I say about this story that won't result in it just being a spoiler? It's a two-parter. It gets from A to B. There's some dancing, there's some acting. It's kind of done. It's not a highlight of the season, but it's by no means a bad story. However, it is followed by for what many people would class as one of the best Doctor Who stories. Again, it's available on DVD. It's been shown quite a lot, and it is Earthshock. A Cyberman story, useful because it doesn't actually have the word Cyberman in the title, so you don't know who it is. Even as fans, you kind of thought at the time, oh, could it be the Silurians? They're underground, there's dinosaurs. I wonder who the villains are. And then you find out it's the Cybermen. But of course, this story is famous amongst Doctor Who fans for one reason: Adric's death. We still never really figured out why we didn't like Adric. We just know that that's the standard way of behaving. That's not clever, it's not right, it's not true. It shouldn't be the case. However, it is. Earthshock ends with Adric dying, and the fact that the Doctor's got a time machine and refuses to go back in time to rescue him, I don't know if that's a fan's view or anything. It's worthy to point out that if you've got the DVD of the Earthshock, you can access something called Episode 5, which is a short Plasticine, or if you're American, claymation version of what happens if Adric got to Earth and survived. It's really funny. It's only about 2 minutes long. I would seek that out. After the marvellous Earthshock, we come to Time Flight. Oh look, it's the Master again. The Master's disguise is so bad that you actually think that's part of the plot. It's not a good story. There's stuff about Concorde, there's stuff... It's as if they were given the chance of filming on board Concorde and they had no idea what else to do with it. It's not a great story. I just don't like it. I'm sorry, some people out there might. It's just not for me. It's not my cup of tea. Takes us to the end of Season 19. Season 20. Now you have to remember that there's only a handful of stories for these remaining Doctors. Season 20 starts with Arc of Infinity, which sees the return of Omega. Omega, the Time Lord who gave the Gallifreyans time travel, very popular character. They've changed the design on Omega, which just confused the viewers, or indeed just confused me. And it takes place in Holland, again a nice bit of location filming for no adequately explored reason. It looks good, and of course marks Tegan's return. You see, Tegan had left at the end of Time Flight. This gap has been milked, and I want to use the word milked, I'm sorry, exploited, that's slightly better, by Big Finish to fit in many stories with just the Doctor and just Nyssa. For example, one of the Fifth Doctor's greatest audios, Spare Parts, fits into this gap. I'll cover those in much more depth later on, or indeed in another show. So, Arc of Infinity, the return of Omega. It's got more Gallifreyan antics, a lot more bickering, as always happens on Gallifrey. And then, of course, Tegan joins the crew again. So it's Tegan, Nyssa and the Doctor. Moving on, we have Snake Dance, which is a return to the Mara again. And the Mara's marvellous. This story also has Martin Clunes, aged about 6, in it. He often tells the story on TV shows when they show this clip. And of course he pretends to be very upset, but knows he's going to get repeat fees for this earring, which was a snake, where people write to him and say, can you tell me all about this earring? And of course it was just a scrunched up bit of tin foil. That can't be the highlight of the story, can it? A Martin Clunes appearance? I would say not. It's the second part of the snake stories from earlier, the Kinder one, and it does sort of round off. It gives a lovely chance for Tegan to shine once more. Terminus, however, marks the departure of Nyssa. There is much talk of Nyssa removing various garments for no reason. I don't know what this was. I mean, let's face it, this is 1983. I'm 11 at this point. Well, actually, I'm coming up to my 12th birthday, and it's just not good. It's not a great story, but it does have some nice moments. Apparently, the ship Terminus, which is where people go if they're suffering from a disease called Lazar's disease, they arrive on this ship of the damned where they could be cured. They could be cured of their disease by exposure to radiation. The reason there's so much radiation on board this ship is because the engines went critical a long time ago. And how long a long time ago actually is they work out by saying that in fact this is the spaceship that fell through time and caused the beginning of the universe. This would be the same beginning of the universe that they were going to crash into in Castrovalva. So would they have met themselves? I just don't know. The origin of the universe is an hotly debated topic amongst Doctor Who fans, and will be explained much later when we cover different versions of canon. So, after Terminus, Nyssa goes, and we have a rather nice story called Enlightenment. Enlightenment is one of my all-time favourite stories. One of my all-time favourite stories now, but not at the time. The denouement of episode 1 reveals that in fact they're not on board an 18th century ship, but, and if stop listening now if you don't want to hear this, thank you, they're actually on board a ship in space, literally a space ship, a wooden, full-rigged, full-masted ship that happens to be in space. It's got immortals, it's got Nurse Gladys Emmanuel from Open All Hours, it's got Keith Barron. It's an extremely well-acted piece. Again, Tegan manages to pull off, despite the words that she's been given, some lovely performances. It's very, very well done. It deals with a whole extra level of creation in the universe. One of the aliens turns to the Doctor and says, "Can there really be a lord of such a small thing as time?" It's really well done. I know that's not a direct quote. I am going off the top of my head after all. Enlightenment is followed by The King's Demons, a very odd little two-parter. The King's Demons, not a great story, but it does fill an hour if you find yourself at a loose end. The crew arrive on Earth around March the 4th, just before the signing of the Magna Carta, which, according to them, gives rights to the common man. It doesn't. We've done some research, the Magna Carta and the law and the history and everything else. It didn't genuinely change too much. I mean, I think there are various versions. Let's talk to a historian about that another time. The King's Demons, of course, being a convoluted story, has to have the Master in it. It also has a shape-changing robot called Chameleon. Chameleon was an attempt to bring back some sort of K9 type thing. The prop was too complicated, it didn't work, and to be honest, it just didn't work at all for anyone, not just the audience. And so that brings us to the end of that season. It is around this time that Peter Davidson's approached to ask if he'll be leaving. He's just beginning to feel his feet, but he has to make the decision quite soon. But before he makes the decision, we have the anniversary special, The Five Doctors. Always worth a bit of a jaunt. The Five Doctors brings on everything. It brings on every actor who's still alive to play those parts. It's very nice, of course. Tom Baker is refusing to do it, so they end up using some old Sharda footage, which was discussed last time. And apart from that, we've got the slight issue that William Hartnell's dead. The character of the First Doctor is played in this by an actor called Richard Herndl. The audience accept that we couldn't possibly have the First Doctor again, and many of the children watching the show just know that he was a crotchety old man, and that's it. It's worthy of note because Susan returns, but then again everybody returns. John Pertwee, it's just a wonderful piece. It's a wonderful piece of nonsense, but it's great. Definitely worth a view. Which brings us, finally, to Peter's last season. He decided to leave just when he was getting the hang of it, says him at conventions. Now, we open season 21 with an episode, with a story many people don't like. I do like it, and I'm proud to admit that I quite like Warriors of the Deep. I'm going to come out of the closet and say, yes, Warriors Deep, that's for me. I'm quite willing to accept how rubbish the Mercury is, because I quite like the rest of the story. A lot of people don't. It's around this time that Doctor Who stops being shown on a Saturday and starts being shown on a Monday and Tuesday afternoon. Well, not afternoon, evening, you know what I mean. So much so that I'm late for Scout, and I'm actually asked to leave when the Scout leader says to me, you have to work out which is more important, Doctor Who or... And by the time he'd reached the word or, I'd made my decision, because as you can tell, it's still part of my life, and I suspect always will be. I apologise for that little wandering. We follow Warriors of the Deep, which of course has the Sea Devils and the Silurians in it. Oh, double whammy of all the things. There's a bit of a theme of that with the whole of Peter Davidson's time. Bring out the old monsters, we'll see what effect that has. And that is part of the reason why Russell doesn't like doing it as much, says he, and yet does so quite a lot. The Awakening, another two-parter. It's kind of set in the Civil War and now. There's a fracture in time, there's a creature that feeds on hate living in the walls of a church. The TARDIS gets destroyed. I think that happens twice in this season, but it's well worth seeing. Yes, of course, it does get destroyed in this story, and it gets destroyed in the next story, which is Frontos. Frontos has a very nice bit of background to it. If you wanted a story that was set at the end of the universe, where mankind's trying to survive, which isn't from the 2007 season, try Frontos. It's very well acted. Did I mention that Turlo joined the crew some time ago? I believe I did. He came from Mordrin of the Undead and stayed with us right through to Planet of Fire. Planet of Fire is in 2 stories' time, but between then and now, of course, we have Resurrection of the Daleks. Resurrection, of course, was covered in the last podcast, if you want a breakdown of what happens in it. But basically, Rodney Bewes and some Daleks are in this story, and so is Lytton, who is a universal henchman for hire. However, the Dalek soldiers have got ludicrous helmets. But hey, they're Dalek soldiers. They're not as good as Robomen. But what could be? I like this story despite itself. I remember at the time it was distorted quite severely by the Winter Olympics. The Winter Olympics, I was going to say, the Summer Olympics. By the Olympics that year. It was 1984. Ah yes, 1984 when I was 12. Bless. Planet of Fire is a very, very good story. It marks the end of Turlo's time with the TARDIS, where he returns to his people to take his rightful place as their leader. It is sadly overshadowed by Caves of Androzani. Now, in Planet of Fire, the Doctor also takes on a new companion, Pippa Gilliam Brown. Of course, with there being a change in Doctors, there's usually a change at this point in Doctor Who history of companions. It's a sort of total mix-up. Of course, in these days, we usually have crossover, a companion leaves, then Doctor leaves, companion leaves, then Doctor leaves, something like that. That way there's continuity for the audience. It's less of a culture shock. So, Planet of Fire finishes, and we're left with Caves of Androzani, which for many people is Peter Davidson's crowning glory. It's a lovely story, excellently acted, excellently thought out. It's got some lovely cliffhangers. It's got everything that Doctor Who should be. Most people see this as the best Davidson story there is. Again, I won't be covering the audios at this point, but I will come back and do them, I promise. So let's give everything marks out of 10. Castrovalva gets an 8. Ford of Doomsday, 6.5, perhaps 7. Kinder, an 8. Visitation, 9. Black Orchid gets a 6. Earthshock gets an 8, but for many people it would be a 9, possibly a 10. Time Flight, I can struggle and I can give it a 6. Arc of Infinity, a 7. Snake Dance, an 8. Mordrin of the Undead, again an 8, a nice story. Terminus, 7. Bye-bye, Nissa. Enlightenment, a 10. However, at the time, a 6. The King's Demon, a 6 then, and a 6 now. 5 Doctors gets a 9. It's almost perfect, but not quite. Don't watch the new version with the ice cream cone. Get the VHS with the proper black obelisk. Warriors of the Deep, I'm sorry, I have to give it a 7 or a 6. No, a 7. No, an 8. Let's give it an 8. I love it. I can't deny it. The Awakening, a 7. Frontos, an 8. Resurrection of the Daleks gets a 9. Planet of Fire, a 7. And Caves of Androzani, a 10. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. If you have been affected by anything discussed in this show, a helpline has definitely not been set up. However, you can email us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk or leave a comment or a picture at our website www.tin-dog.co.uk. Doctor Who is a registered trademark of the BBC and they'll come round and bite you if you misuse it. No infringement is intended.